So I'm going to record us starting now.
Okay.
Just so you know, and this is for your classmates if they need to go back and look at it, especially those who like work right now, they can't make it. So.
Okay.
Okay. So the way we're going to start is I actually want to start by going over the first response paper that's due in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Okay. So
yeah. Okay.
I'm going to
I have a
share.
question about
Okay,
this.
good. I'm going to share the document with you so you can see it on your screen. And then I'll go through some of the directions, and then you can ask me any questions that you have. So let me just share that with you. Give me just a second. All right. So are you able to see the document?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, cool. Let me zoom in a little closer so it's a little easier to read. All right, so with this first response paper, it's due, as you know, February 20th by the end of the day. So you have that whole day until 11:59 to turn it in. It's worth 25 points. It only needs to be 2 to 3 pages with 1-inch margins, double spaced. All that makes sense?
Yeah. May I just do 2 pages?
What?
If I just write 2 pages, is that okay?
Yeah, as long as you do. So what I'm about to do is go through some of the stuff that it requires. As long as you do the stuff I ask you to do, 2 pages is totally fine.
Okay.
So this paper needs to have an introduction and a conclusion. So make sure that those 2 things are pretty short, but that they have things like your thesis, so you're restating your thesis in the conclusion, and they sort of tie things together in your conclusion. But make sure that those are short, because primarily what your paper is going to consist of is the body section. And so the body section, what I'm going to have you do is, first of all, you're going to use 2 paragraphs explaining one of the theories that we've discussed. So starting today, we're going to start talking about theories. So you could use the one we talk about today, or the one we'll talk about Thursday, or what we talk about next week too.
Okay. So before the response paper due, we have the 3 series discussed, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so pick one of the ones that you feel like you understood the most, or if you aren't able to go to all the discussions online, maybe the one we talked about online is the one that's easiest for you because you know more about it.
Oh yeah.
And typically what I suggest with this, the first paragraph is sort of the big picture about what the theory is, and then the second paragraph is you pick a little bit of that theory to be more specific on. So maybe a key term or 2 that you expand on.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And then the rest of the paper, so something like 3 paragraphs describing an example of this theory in action. So in other words, like today we'll be talking about ideology. Hold on, I'm adding another participant. Hold on just a second. Okay. All right. Hi, Elizabeth. We'll see if she comes up. I'll continue to explain. She's probably adjusting her settings and stuff. Okay, so in these 3 paragraphs, you just tell me, like, this is how I see this functioning in reality. So you might talk about how education is an example of ideology at play, and then you give me some examples of how that's happening. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what's really important here is that you spend more time talking about the example and less time talking about the theory. Okay, so for example, if you decide to have a really big paragraph talking about theory and you're giving plenty of details and you don't want to use an extra paragraph, that's fine. Just make sure that there's still, like, you're spending more time on the example. Okay? Okay. And then I've given you some examples to work with, so you can, we haven't talked about invitational rhetoric, but we will next week, so that will make more sense when you get there. And I've given you some ideas about, like, you could use a speech, an interview. I know the State of the Union is tonight. That's something that you could use if you wanted to as an example. Okay? So I'll come back to this grading note in just a second, but what's really important is that you do not need a reference page. but you do need to cite the reading to support your connections that you're making. So make sure that even though you're not having a reference page, you're using direct quotes from the text.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And then finally, when you submit your paper, you'll notice online there's a little thing that has like a comment box, right? You'll see it when you submit. When you submit, just write a little bit, like a sentence or two telling me how you feel like you did on your paper and giving you a grade. So
give myself a grade.
Yeah.
Oh, so
yeah.
The grade is is the percent or the A, B, C, D, E.
So what you could do is give yourself a score out of 25.
Oh.
Okay. So the way you're going to do this is I've given you a rubric on the next page.
Oh.
So look over this rubric and, tell yourself, did I do this? Did I do this? Blah, blah, blah. And then if you did all of that stuff, then give yourself that perfect score.
Okay.
Right. And the point of this is what's going to happen is I'm going to average whatever you give yourself and whatever I give you into your grade.
Oh.
Okay. So this is a little bit like non-traditional, but it helps you have some agency in the grading process and so that you can see how I'm grading as well.
Okay.
Okay. Elizabeth, I know you came in a little late, but is all this, did you catch up? Is this making sense?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay. All right. Just making sure. Okay. So if there are any other questions, feel free to send me an email or something. And then I'm happy to help you with this, but you have a couple of weeks. So I'll always be checking in at the beginning of our discussions to see if anyone has questions.
I have a final question for this response paper. So is after I submit the paper and I write the evaluation is it on a separate the Word document or I just write on the canvas?
You can just write it on Canvas, your evaluation of yourself. Just give a sentence or two and give yourself a score. And there's going to be like a little comment box when you submit the Word document.
Oh,
so
okay.
The Word document will just be your essay and the comment box will have your grade in it.
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And if you don't do the grading thing, you don't miss points for that. So that's more about you trying to grade yourself. So if you don't understand that, you're not going to miss points if you do it wrong.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right. Cool. Well, let's go ahead and get into the reading for today so that we don't take up too much of your time. Because I think, Elizabeth, if I remember correctly, you're on your lunch break, right?
Yes.
All right. So let's, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to share with you the PowerPoint that I typically show in class so that you can sort of follow along with me and see what I feel like is really important for you to learn from this reading.
Okay.
So first of all, I want to say that so far, unless I've emailed you, and I don't think either of you, that's the case, the reading comprehension questions and the political compromise stuff that you did, you're all doing great. I'm not always going to comment on all of those. I typically give you like a big general comment. But yeah, keep doing what you're doing. And I'll always email you if it's like there's something going on that like you're not understanding the directions or something, just to give you like immediate feedback on that. Okay. All right. So today, what I want us to focus on is we're going to be talking about Althusser's ideology reading, and a few of the things that we're going to identify is first we'll talk about the function of something called ISAs for ideology. So that will help solidify those two theses that he brings up in the text. And then we'll also talk about hegemony and interpolation. All right, so those are some key words that we'll get to. We will probably, I don't think we're going to get to this bullet point. So I've bolded these two because these are the two that are really important today. Okay?
Okay.
All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Let me see if I can get this. Sorry, it's not working. There we go. All right, so first thing that you need to know, most of you probably heard about the word ideology. So I've given you a definition so you can know it's sort of like about the goals, values that we have, and how those things shape our expectations and our actions.
Mm-hmm.
Do either of you have another definition of ideology that's similar to this? Like, do you want to add to this definition?
Well, I just have what the book said.
Oh, yeah. Do you want to tell us?
It said, at some point it said it's our imaginary relationship to real conditions.
Yes, good. So that's difficult. Could you make sense of that?
A little bit. I had to read it a few times.
It's hard, yeah.
It says that, because I had a little note below, it's basically telling us that we're free subjects. When I guess we're really not.
Yeah. So that's a lot of what he's getting at throughout this whole reading. So that first thesis helps us solidify what ideology means. So this relationship, this imaginary relationship to real conditions, what he's trying to tell us is that the meanings that we have aren't real. In other words, they're created by us in order to get us to do things.
Yeah.
Is this making sense so far?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll give you an example after we get to the other thesis so that it helps solidify what he's trying to tell us. So Yanin, could you give me the other thesis? Do you have the reading in front of you?
Yeah, but I choose the first thesis.
Okay. All right. So the other thesis is ideology has a material existence.
Mm-hmm.
So what he's saying with that is...
What's that mean?
Yeah, I know. Trust me, it's tough. So despite the fact that there's these imaginary relationships, he's telling us that those imaginary relationships has created concrete things that are around us. So in other words, the fact that we have an imaginary relationship to education, right? That imaginary relationship then makes us need to create things like classrooms or buildings to hold classrooms in, right? So he's trying to tell us that just because there's this imaginary relationship doesn't mean that it doesn't matter.
Oh, okay.
Are you following me so far?
Yeah.
So a good way of getting this is, have both of you heard about how race is something that was created in order to allow white people to be higher up in the hierarchy?
Yeah.
Are both of you familiar with that whole idea that race isn't real?
Yeah, well, I mean, what I keep hearing in a lot of my classes is that it's a construct that we created, basically.
Yes. So he's sort of saying everything is a construct. So we think about race as a construct. That first thesis is saying this idea of race is an imaginary relationship to our reality.
Mm-hmm.
The second thesis is saying that imaginary relationship has actually created real oppression. It's created things like the prison system that is clearly a racist structure right now.
Okay.
Are you following? Yeah, Yanin, are you following us too?
Yes.
Okay, good. So both of those theses are really important in understanding everything else that he has to say. So something else that's important is that you understand the difference between RSAs and ISAs. So if you go to the first page, this is page 13 in the text, in the introduction, before we even get to Althusser's writing, they talk about RSAs and ISAs. So can one of you find what an RSA is?
I'm looking.
Okay, all right.
Ideological state apparatus? Oh, wait, no, that's the ISA.
That's good. I was going to ask that question next. So we have ISAs. They are ideological state apparatuses, right?
Yeah.
So RSAs are repressive state apparatuses. And he felt like we needed to distinguish between the two because initially RSAs were something that the people in power found to be effective. So RSAs are things like things that punish us, things that hold us down.
Oh.
So things like the prison system, or sometimes you could look at the police in this way. Right?
Oh yeah, he said police, military courts.
Yes, yeah.
By violence, I guess.
Yeah. So RSAs think about like violence and making people feel like, oh my gosh, I can't move or I'm going to get hurt.
Okay.
ISAs perform the same sort of function as RSAs, but ISAs are nicer about it. So in other words, they get you to sort of buy in to this ideology without putting pressure on you. A good example of the, I mean, education is a good example of this. Family, friends, sort of structure that we have in society that doesn't necessarily like punish you harshly.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, and he felt like ISAs are something that he wanted to explore a little bit more because they're so tricky, right? They convince us to follow along with the people in power without us realizing that we're following along. Whereas RSAs make us like want to resist. We're like, no, stop doing this.
Right.
Yeah. So this is a really like a key part of his understanding of ideology is ideological state apparatuses help us buy into this ideology.
All right.
Understood.
Understood. Good. Before we move forward, any questions about what I've said so far?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay, good. So we're going to skip over this. I'll answer these questions relatively quickly. Typically in class, we would, break into groups and we do this, but we're not going to do that here. So the first question, for those of you who are like, where is he saying this in the text? This is on page 14. And he tells us that there are a couple of reasons why ideology needs to exist. So on the left side of 14, he says, first of all, we had people like priests in power who all of a sudden got like really hungry about the power, and they started to realize that they could control people. And so one reason we needed ideology is because the people in power created the need. Right? They are partially to blame.
Oh, okay.
Another reason is in order to avoid alienation. So what this means is like if I'm someone dwindling out in space and I see a bunch of people within an ideology, I am going to feel like I'm weird. I'm going to feel alienated because everyone else is doing something that I don't understand. They look like me, but we're not doing the same things. And so we're going to want to join that ideology because we don't want to feel alienated.
Okay.
And then finally, what's happening is that this allows for us to have meaning in our life. So sort of on top of the alienation thing is that my ideology tells me my reason to live. Right? It tells me that whether I need to work or not in order to survive. That kind of stuff.
I have a question.
Yeah.
May I say the ideology next the company culture?
Did you say what kind of culture?
Company culture.
Company culture?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really important. So when I talk about ideology, I'm talking about like American ideology or Chinese ideology. So like a big picture thing.
Oh, yeah.
But there are smaller ideologies that we could talk about. Like if you went into work at a corporation and you weren't a part of their ideology, you would want to fold into that ideology to feel comfortable.
Oh.
So that's like a smaller scale example of like Althusser's big scale ideology. Is that where you were getting at, Yanin?
And so we can see this. we follow the ideology because we want to look same as the others, right?
Yes, yeah. We want to like feel like we belong, feel like we can connect. And this will make sense too when we talk about Burke in next class, if you're able to make it.
Okay.
And so for question number 2, he does not believe we can operate outside of this ideology, because even those of us who are trying to resist the ideology are still resisting within this understanding of the world. So I am always, even if I feel uncomfortable, like I don't like the way the United States is going right now, right? If that were the case, I would like to say I'm outside of the ideology, but according to Althusser, I'm still inside the ideology. I'm just trying to resist.
Is it because you're kind of like recognizing it? Like you're acknowledging it?
Exactly. That has a lot to do with it. Yeah, like the fact that you are upset about something tells us that you're within the ideology.
Okay.
Okay, if you resist the ideology, so what will happen?
That's a good question. So I actually think that gets us to the next slide. So this will help answer that. So there's something called hegemony that happens within ideology. And hegemony, think about this as like the push and the pull between people in power and people who are not in power. All right. So for example, if I were to resist, I am pushing against the people in power, and sometimes they'll pull from me in order to satisfy my frustration so that I will continue to follow along. So like an example of this would be when gay marriage became legal. So there were a lot of people who were LGBTQ who were like pushing to become accepted. And then the people in power were like, okay, we'll give you gay marriage. So they pulled a little bit from the people who weren't in power. And then they hoped that that would make, LGBTQ people overall satisfied because they gave them a little bit. Obviously, so I'm not saying that they should be satisfied. What I'm saying is this process works in a way that like, if you resist, you might get a little bit, but you're probably not going to get everything.
Oh, okay. I see.
Yeah. So if we were in a repressive state apparatus, if you would resist, we would punish you. You would go to jail. You would, I'm not even going to talk about the other negative things that would happen to you. But with IRSAs, they allow you to play around a little bit, but they're still tricking you into being satisfied.
Oh.
Okay.
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 Okay. I know this is kind of pessimistic, but if you start learning this stuff, you can see it happening all the time in our society.
Yeah.
It's just like a process that becomes so natural to us, and it makes sense, right? I mean, every time we compromise as a society, that's hegemony at play.
Okay. So my message is following dominant ideology is the only way as the citizen to do, and the resist the ideology is impossible. That only exists in our minds. That is a kind of a dream, right?
Yeah. So you can resist a little bit, but you can't like exist outside of it. Like according to Althusser, I will say that there are other people who study this who see it differently. But according to Althusser, you might have sort of like a counter ideology, but you're still within that ideology.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. That's we have just a couple more things to talk about, but I want to make sure this one is like a concept that I talk about a lot. So I want to make sure that it's solidified. Do you have questions about this?
No, it's making more sense to me now.
Okay, good. I know it's only a few of you, but this is why we do this. And it really will be helpful when you're working on your papers, because you do need to know what at least one of these theories is doing, and I know the readings are really tough, so this will help you. Okay, so with that little inspirational speech that I just gave, I want to talk about interpolation. So this was the other reading question you had for this reading. So can either of you tell me, what is interpolation?
I guess like you're just
interpolation. Yeah.
You're just kind of you're not recognizing it, but you're just taking in information or making choices without really thinking about it.
Yeah, that's part of it. Yanan, do you want to add a little bit more?
Yeah, that is the passively and unconsciously you can do. So the only way is you just follow it, but you can disagree with it.
Yeah. So both of you are on point. So interpolation, the simple way of understanding this is you are brought into an ideology. So think about this as I interpolate you by calling you by your name. So I've interpolated you into my classroom, right? So here, I'll give you, this is something that when we are interpolated, we as people in ideology, we start to understand ourselves based on that interpolation. So in other words, like Elizabeth, if I just, and I'm cheating because your name is like right in front of me, but if I were to just call both of you like, hey you, over and over again, I never actually called you by your name, according to this concept, that would affect the way that you operate within the ideology of our classroom. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just putting it into, where I used to work, my old boss wouldn't say my name at the beginning. She would just say, hey, until like I kind of said, who the hell are you talking to? Yeah. Eventually she started saying my name. So it's funny.
Yes. So that example is a good example of hegemony.
Okay.
So it's a basic example, but you like pushed back, right?
Yeah.
And then you created the change and you got her to say your name. Yeah. So that's, and this kind of stuff is happening on like a broader scale all the time, right? So when would you two, like, when do you think you are interpolated into a society? Like, at what age do you think interpolation starts?
Very young. I mean, I guess as soon as you can start understanding things.
Yeah, so some people who study ideology even say that when like a parent has a gender reveal party, that's the first time you become interpolated because you've already become a subject. So you've already become something that isn't an individual, you become something that's created for you.
Yeah.
You don't have to agree with that, but that's like, I'm trying to give you an idea of like where people stand on this issue. I think other people would say that it takes until, like Elizabeth said, until you can really understand what's going on, then you might become interpolated.
Okay.
This is when you move to another country. So maybe Yanan, maybe you may or may not feel like you're interpolated yet, but your process starts all over again if you become folded into the ideology. Right. So maybe the first time you land to this other country, you might not even understand any of the language. So you're not interpolated yet because you don't feel recognized.
I see.
Yeah. So it takes for some of us, it takes a little bit of time. So I'll answer my own question here, because both of you I know are doing a lot of work since there's no one else here. We know who our leader is based on who is calling to us or who is interpolating us. So the fact that I am the one who sets up the meeting and calls you by your name, I'm telling you, not that I am comfortable with this, but I'm telling you that I am your leader, right? I'm not being super purposeful about it, but it's something that's happening. That's how we know. They're giving us all of these things. They're putting all these things onto us.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. This is a lot, I know. There's so much more to talk about, but I promised that I wouldn't take up too much of your time. I want to make sure that you understand ISAs and RSAs.
Mm-hmm.
Those would be things that you could write about in your paper. You should understand hegemony, and you should understand interpolation.
Okay.
Okay.
Are you two okay on all three of those things?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, a reminder, the State of the Union is tonight, so if you get a chance, the activity that we're doing this week relates to the State of the Union, so you'll need to watch at least a little bit of it before you do that activity.
Oh.
But I suggest watching that, and also watch the response by a Democrat named Stacey Abrams if you get a chance.
That's tonight?
It's tonight, yeah. I believe it starts at 5. Yeah. But here's the thing. You can like watch repeats of it. You can watch clips of it. You can find it however you want to find it. But that will help you stay sort of up to date with what's going on politically.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
All right. Well, I think that's all I have for you both.
I just had one question.
Okay, cool.
But it wasn't about this reading. It was about the dramatism.
Mm-hmm.
I was just kind of trying to get a better understanding of the symbolic action.
Uh-huh.
How he says there can be no action with motion, but there could be motion with action.
Yeah.
I was kind of confused on that.
So when I know you can't make the video for the next one, but I'll give you a little bit of an answer now, but then watch the video after I post it too, because I'll explain it in more detail.
Oh, okay.
But just the general idea is, think about motion as like an unconscious thing. It's something that we are doing all the time because we're breathing. Right? We might be in motion when we're sleeping. There could be debates about when we're eating, right? Digestion would be a good example of when we're in motion.
Okay.
But action is when we have control, or we're doing something with at least some parts of our conscious mind going on.
Okay.
So that's what he's trying to say. He's making it very complicated, but he's trying to remind us that we should be aware about the symbols that we're using when we can be.
Okay. And then when he says actions are not reducible in terms of motion, is he saying, I don't know what he's saying.
These things are complicated. That's why we do this. So he's saying we can't make an excuse about our actions by just saying, well, it was just natural.
Oh, okay.
So again, he's really concerned with like our choices and our motives behind our choices, and why we're walking the way that we're walking, why we're wearing the clothes that we're wearing, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. That was helpful.
Okay, good. All right, and you can watch the video if you want to.
Yeah.
Otherwise, any other questions?
Where is the video we can watch?
Oh, so it'll be posted after I give the discussion on Thursday.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I'll record it just like I'm recording this one, and then you can watch it. So.
Oh, okay.
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 All right. Well, cool. If you have any other questions, always email me. I'm happy to help in any way that I can.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor.
All right. Yeah.
Okay,
thank you so
Professor.
much. Have a great day.
Have a nice day,
Bye.
Professor.
Bye.
Bye.